This video is going to be going over how to add and subtract decimals. So before we get started, I just wanted to do a very quick place value review. So here's a nice place value chart, just how you read decimals. Remember, when you get to a decimal place, that and is how you pronounce the decimal. Then we have our tenths, our hundredths, thousandths, and then so on and so forth. Just be careful how you read decimals, how you write decimals. If they ask you to take a decimal and convert it into an actual number, make sure you're putting them in the right place value spot. So we're going to go ahead and get started. You are going to fill out part of your foldable today. It looks like this. We are going to be focusing on just the top half, the adding and subtracting of our decimals. So we're going to fill that part out through this video. So we're going to go ahead and zoom up on the adding decimals part. So we're going to fill in the blanks first. It says to add decimals, we need to make sure we line up the decimals. So write decimals in that first box. Then once you've added or lined up those decimals, add as with whole numbers. You may have to write zeros as placeholders. So if our numbers, our digits behind our decimal don't line up perfectly, we can add in some zeros as our placeholders. And then lastly, we need to bring down the decimal point. So we've got one example that we're going to go ahead and do together. Make sure you're filling this out on your foldable. And our first step is to line up the decimals. So we're going to go ahead and rewrite this problem. 2.12 plus 9.8. I did not put one on top of the other for any specific reason. I just wrote 2.12 plus 9.8, or if we were going to pronounce our decimals, 2 and 12 hundredths plus 9 and 8 tenths. Now here, right underneath our 2, there's this blank spot. That's what they mean by adding a 0 as a placeholder. So adding that 0 at the end of our 9 and 8 tenths doesn't change the value. It just makes sure all of our digits line up perfectly. So we're going to do adding decimals like normal, or adding numbers like normal, excuse me. So 2 plus 0 gives us 2. 1 plus 8 is 9. And then we need to bring down our decimal straight down, and 9 plus 2 is 11. So our answer here is 11 and 92 hundredths. Now you should have a little bit more room on that box. Squeeze another problem in there. I'm going to give us another one here. 7.421 or 7 and 421 thousandths plus 92 and 55 hundredths. So we're going to need to line up our numbers, line up our decimals again. I normally pick the number that has the most digits behind the decimal and put that on top. So I'm going to do 742 plus 92 and 55 hundredths. Again, we're going to add a 0 for a placeholder and then add like normal. So 1 plus 0 is 1, 2 plus 5 is 7, 4 plus 5 is 9. Bring down your decimal. 7 plus 2 is 9. And there's nothing here, so we're just going to bring our 9 down. So we actually have 99 and 971 thousandths as our answer. So the big things to take away when you're adding up decimals is you need to line up your decimals. We're going to go ahead on now to subtracting. So again, it's actually to the top right-hand corner of your foldable. Subtracting decimals, I've zoomed up on that little note-taking sheet. So again, it says line up the decimals. We need to make sure we're lining up our decimals. Then subtract as you would with whole numbers. You may have to write zeros and borrow, depending if our numbers don't work properly there. We're going to have to borrow from our neighbor. So the last step is bring down the decimal point. So really, this is very similar to adding decimals. We still line up our decimals, and we still have to write zeros as placeholders if necessary. So here, our first number has to go on the top. So I'm going to write 8. But since we are subtracting a number with a decimal, there is no decimal written behind our 8, but we can actually assume that there is one because that's not changing our value. And again, there's 2 blank spots. We're going to fill that with placeholders. Now here's going to be a little bit tricky because we can't do 0 minus 5. And when we go to borrow from our neighbor here, there's nothing to borrow from. So we have to go all the way to the 8. We're going to change that 8 into a 7. And this 0 becomes a 10. Now, again, we have to borrow from here. So this actually becomes a 9. And our first 0 becomes a 10. So 10 minus 5 is 5. 9 minus 6 is 3. Drop down your decimal point. And then 7 minus 1 is 6. So our answer here is 6 35 hundredths. We lined up our decimals, we added zeros as placeholders, and we also had to borrow. Kind of used all 3 of these steps that we have in our note sheet. So again, you should probably be able to fit one in there, squeeze another problem in there. And we have 38 72 hundredths minus 8 61 hundredths. So we're going to go ahead again, line these up. Since they both have the same digits behind our decimal, we don't have to worry about adding any placeholders. We just might have to borrow. So line up your decimal places. Again, subtract like normal. So 2 minus 1 is 1. 7 minus 6 is 1. Drop down your decimal. 8 minus 8 is 0. And then 3, there's nothing here, so we're bringing that 3 down. So our final answer should be 30 11 hundredths.